it still hurts them, in my view.
Okay, Shruti, I think that I'll add a question.
I mean, I want to say a couple of things.
Can I add just a minor question of my own? I think Sadanand is right in distinguishing between an esoteric, academic, intellectual, journalistic conversation and what a political party must grapple with. A.K. Antony, no less, brought out a report that spoke about the perception of the Congress as an anti-Hindu party, right? This is Mr. Antony, a congressman whose son has since joined the BJP. Sadanand makes the important point that there's no point talking about change when it's just theory. You can't bring change till you win elections. You can't bring change till you actually have the power to influence change. And to that extent, this calls for some tactical and strategic shifts. Also, it's not clear what your ideology is because your chief minister in Himachal Pradesh has declared a full day off. Your ally in Delhi is leading Hanuman parts across 70 seats. Your other ally in Maharashtra, Uddhav Thackeray, is talking about being a 1 crore contributor when he was Maharashtra chief minister as a Ram Bhakt to the Mandir trust. And your other ally, Udaynithi Stalin, is pulling you in completely the other direction. The point is the Congress at the moment can't claim ideological inclusiveness or Nehruvian secularism because it isn't even playing from that playbook.
Possibly, yes. I mean, I think a couple of things. I don't think the hijab question is the touchstone of India's secularism. I think one of the mistakes we have always constantly made is really made the question of Indian secularism about the Muslim minority, though, of course, that is there. I mean, I keep saying this. I mean, the triangulation has to be with the caste question, which is also a minority question, and how that is getting reasserted. On that, I want to say whether it is a question of religion or whether it is a question of caste, the BJP has created a new social and political engineering where you are getting a uniformity. Incorporation in uniformity. I will not be surprised tomorrow that it might even have Muslim representation in parliament back. You already have a vice president. The former vice chancellor of AMU has been made a vice president or part of the executive of the BJP. So, Das Gupta said on your show that, that's what needs to be done. Having said all of that, that's not where it's at. The story is to create a new, very aggressive identity for what it means to be an Indian today. And I think that's where the question is about nationalism and not simply about a Hindu first polity. And I think this is where the opposition has missed a really major issue.
I'm glad you brought up nationalism because the opposition has completely ceded that space completely to the right.
And precisely because something like the Congress was as it was synonymous with the freedom of India. And, it is really the original nation building, party. And to have ceded the question of nationalism is interesting. And so that same goes with liberalism. An argument can be made. I mean, I couldn't get the chance to say it, whether it is the English language, whether it is cricket, whether it is liberalism. India remade these things in the light of its own culture and its own context. It has ceded space. It has, and in the same way, I think, Prime Minister Modi is, in my view, reinventing or reformatting a particular form of a party state in India. So there are two leaders in this world today who have called the coming of a new era. One is, of course, our Prime Minister 2 days ago, the Ram Temple inaugurating a new era. The other leader, of course, is Xi Jinping, who earlier this year called the inauguration also of a new era. So you're seeing a shift in world politics, which is, of course, anti-Western. It is a rise of Asia. It is a rise of a neo-nationalism, which the BJP is prosecuting in two ways. One, by the internal making of India and its social fabric, which is based on an aggressive uniformity, and another, which is a projection of a strong India internationally. Now, the Congress, on the other hand, or whether it is the Congress or the opposition, has gotten fragmented because it is thinking of pluralism as a series of fragments. And that is a big problem. Whether it is federalism, whether it is caste, it is trying to, this kind of fusionist, as it were, ideology, like very aggressive fusion that the BJP is demanding out of Indians, is being countered by a series of fissures and fragmentation, which I'm afraid is not going to add up, as we are seeing already with the India coalition. So yes, you need a counter. definition,
Okay.
a counter idea of
Let's
nationalism.
talk in the last few moments of what that counter might look like. Is there a counter? Sadanand, you spoke about how the very idea of Nehruvian secularism in its detachment was unworkable. Liberals today are quoting Mahatma Gandhi. Liberals today are quoting Mahatma Gandhi as an example of an alternative. I'll quote something that I've reported on the Indian military. The Indian military has actually perfected, in my understanding, a contemporary model of pluralism. It's, of course, nationalist credentials can't be questioned, but it is perfectly common, depending on the regiment, for a Muslim commanding officer to lead an arti, or for a Hindu commanding officer to basically lead namaz. I have seen this happen again and again and again while reporting the military. Is that the counter narrative? Nationalism plus syncretism? And is the mistake the opposition made to miss both nationalism and talk about tolerance, not actual participation?
I mean, I don't know what the answer is in religious terms, right? This is very complex, right? Even when Gandhi was trying this, with, incorporating, Ishwar Allah Tere Naam and all in his bhajans. I mean, it had very limited success if you look at its purchase among the Muslim population, right? They had some sort of Muslims who came to Congress, but by and large, right, if you sort of look, for example, why was the Muslim League so wildly successful? In part because that kind of syncretism didn't really necessarily play well with everyone. So I don't know whether syncretism is going to get you to that point. My own preference obviously would be, I actually am a believer in old-fashioned liberalism, where I think that you have to accept that different faiths, view things very differently, and the state should sort of stay above it all, and not take sides.
But then would you support a uniform civil code?
I absolutely would support a uniform civil code.
And is that a contradictory statement you just made there?
How?
You said that you believe that every community will interpret their faith in their own way, and largely the state should remain far away from interpreting that faith or policing it or guiding it or steering it. A uniform civil code, which I support too, by the way, would do precisely that.
Yeah. So, let's just take an example, right? Take any Western democracy. You have a set of laws that apply uniformly to everybody. And then within that, you don't sort of, you're not trying to force the fusion of Christianity and Hinduism or Christianity and Islam and so on. So, but the fact is that you have a certain set of laws and they have to apply equally to everyone. You can't have sort of separate laws of divorce, separate laws for marriage, separate laws for inheritance, as you have in India. So I think it's perfectly compatible. You can have a uniform civil code, because that is the basic liberal principle. And this is where I think, the Nehruvian project stumbled. But at the same time, you don't have the state that's sort of getting so deeply involved in religious affairs and saying that we're going to try and invent this new kind of syncretism. The fact is that you're going to have to come up with some form. Pluralism has to be central to India. No serious country, right, where 1 out of 5 people is not Hindu. No serious country can sort of hope to progress unless it has come to terms with the reality of its population. I'm a critic of sort of the Nehruvian project. I think they blundered. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think that the current regime is doing a good job. I think they're doing an awful job, right? So the question is, how do you come to this? Will the BJP come to this by, sort of softening itself on the edges, incorporating more liberal principles, being more inclusive of people of Indian Muslims and Christians? That would be fantastic. Or will the Congress reinvent itself and do it in a way while acknowledging the fact that, the reality of Indian politics is that this is a deeply religious country and Hindus are deeply religious, and that the old elite who were much less religious have really lost power. They've lost political power. They've lost most of their cultural power, and sort of readjust themselves to this new reality. I think their future depends on that. I don't really see them with sort of adjusting to these new realities. And so I think the best bet for Indian pluralism going ahead would be to see a kind of a more sophisticated form of thinking coming from within the BJP. So I'm hoping that will happen.
Yes, Shruti, that's a very interesting question. Will the BJP soften its edges, or will the Congress-led opposition change? I tend to agree with Sadanand. We don't know. We're all guessing. But if Modi does take a third term, as is now believed to be pretty much a given, there is a very interesting outreach happening with Pasmanda Muslims in Uttar Pradesh. There was a meeting with Christian leaders on Christmas. We don't know. But to Sadanand's central question, does the counter come from within the BJP or does it come from the opposition? And what does the new model of pluralism look like? And don't you need a language of faith to actually talk about faith?
I would like to put it slightly differently, because I think people have faith, and whether they're in the Congress or otherwise, and they display it as and when. I think the challenge is something else, which is that extreme ideas, whether they're right wing, particularly right wing, they incite emotion and identification. They galvanize people psychically. And that's really what has happened in the last 10 years, a muscular India, a muscular nation, a Hindu first. And, this is a real problem actually for the opposition, because something like the constitutional value that they want to protect, constitutional values, this seems all too, as it were, I would say, like Pika, it feels like emotionally not very charged. And so how do you kind of create a new psychic emotive map? And I think this is...
You need a good story. At least you need a good story.
That was also Gandhi's answer, because this is why Mahatma Gandhi did so well, because he actually kind of made things like patience and, very, very kind of like boring sentiments had a lot of traction. And I think that's the missing link in some ways, that you need a kind of pluralism or a kind of, the idea of a plural India, which is both strong and which in fact incites emotions and pride. We should have pride in the history that actually at the very divisive moment of partition, India held its nerve and became a secular polity at the very moment that its borders were, partitioned on the basis of religion. Right. I mean, these are things to be incredibly proud of, rather than, and I think there are issues around how pride is now constituted. And I don't agree with, though that might be the most pragmatic answer that Dhume gives. I think the BJP is also caught up in its own versions of extremism. You have, it's an insatiable right on its side as well. You've now had the Ram temple, then it's going to be Kashi, then it's going to be Mathura. You literally had Bhagwat, the chief of the RSS, saying, please don't think every mosque has a shivling underneath it. Right? He is trying to discipline what is now an insatiable passion, which has been actually unleashed in India. So I think they have their task cut out too. Prime Minister Modi's speech was, no, I want to finish that. I don't think this moderation is going to come easily. In fact, it will be the biggest challenge for the BJP in the third term, whether it goes. And I think if you speak to BJP ideologues, they will themselves say they don't have an answer. You will actually, there'd be some who would want it to be a bit more centrist, a bit more liberal, and others who, as I said, its constituency is going to demand more and more such exclusive policies. And that is, I think, that's where it's at.
Let me just give Sadanand the brief closing word with picking up on what you said. It's true that both the RSS chief, who spoke about Hosh with Josh, and the Prime Minister, who spoke about Vijay with Vinay, decency with victory, in a moment of victory, are trying to indeed, I think, tell the base that this cannot be an endless, there has to be the proverbial Lakshman Rekha that is drawn somewhere. Maybe it ends with Kashi and Mathura. I don't know. That will be decided in the courts. But Sadanand, there is some argument you hear from BJP ideologues who say that countries like the United States of America, where you are today, or countries like the United Kingdom, where Shruti is today, have been shaped by Christian values, the politics, the culture, the subculture, without diminishing their diversity. And there could be people in the BJP who would argue that it is possible to recognize and acknowledge and celebrate the Hindu majority and its sentiments without diminishing the minorities. And they would point westwards to make that argument. So last word to you on that question or that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's theoretically possible. I'm not going to dismiss it, out of hand. And it's certainly true that even liberalism, right? I mean, many scholars have written about this. In many ways, the central core precept of liberalism, which is that the individual comes before the group, is something that's derived from a Christian worldview, right? So I mean, there are sort of I happen to think it's a universal principle that that travels well, but many people would argue that it's a principle that really works most properly in countries that have been steeped in a Christian tradition, even if they're post-Christian now. So I would love to see this put into effect. I would love to see evidence that you can come up with a set of principles that allow the flourishing of people of all faiths in India while celebrating Hinduism and the beauties of Hinduism. All I would say is that I'm a little bit skeptical based on the evidence so far. And I think I have reason to be skeptical. I don't see what we've seen over the last 10 years. I don't really see a lot of evidence of people trying to make room or trying to create a new form of pluralism that is, as respectful and as open and warm toward people of other faiths, and is sort of rooted in the idea that they're going to have equal legal rights and so on. So I'd like to see what this experiment comes up with. I would love it to be sort of gentler and more inclusive. But for now, I have to say that the principles that seem to have worked so far best for human beings are liberal principles. And so it's on the onus is on the Hindu nationalists, the onus is on the BJP to prove that they can come up with an alternative that doesn't just make them happy, right? The litmus test is that will Muslims say that, oh, look, this is a better system? And so far, we haven't seen evidence of that, in my view.